Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video in the Python series. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to return values from functions in Python. Alright guys, so now we're going to do returning values from functions. In last episode, we learned about how to create functions and use functions within Python. And also we learned how parameters and arguments work and how you can pass in values to functions to make them do stuff dynamically. And now I'm going to show you how to return values from functions, which simply means giving a value back from the function after you call it. So in a previous episode, we learned about how to do different string functions. So different functions that are built into Python that you can execute upon string variables. So we can do something like name is equal to Cody. And then now we can do name dot, and then we have all these different functions here that are part of a string variable. So we can do something like capitalize. We can do something like is lower, is numeric, which gives you a boolean of true or false. So we can do something like upper. So this should, if we do control Q here, it tells you what it does. It says returns a copy of the string converted to uppercase. So keyword return. What does it mean to return? So this means that whenever we call the upper function, this will give you a value back. So what you can do is use that value to store it into a variable. So we can do something like name is equal to name.upper. So what this will do, and we've seen this before, but just as a refresher, what this will do is it will take the string here and convert all the letters into uppercase. And then what it will do is return it so that you can store that into a variable. In this case, we're not storing into a new variable, we're reassigning the original variable that we had. Let's say we do print name. We can say name. So now it should print out the name in uppercase letters. And there we go, get name Cody. It's screaming at me, right? So to return a value from a function simply means to give it back so that you can do something with it, like store it in a variable or use it in a calculation or something like that. It's actually very, very simple, okay? But none of the functions that we've made so far is capable of doing that. Everything that we've done pretty much so far is just printing out. So for example, if we take our add function from last episode, let me just uncomment it here. As you can see, we have an add function that takes in two numbers, adds them, and prints out the result. Pretty cool, pretty simple, right? But let's say that we don't want to print it out. We just want to use the result in our code to do some other calculation with, or just use it in some other way. We don't want to have to print out something every single time. It's not very realistic to print out the result of a calculation every single time. That's not what you do in everyday programs, in actual software, right? So in this case, realistically, what you would do is, let's go ahead and change this. We'll say sum is equal to num1 plus num2. And then now what we can do is do return sum. And now if we go down here and we do something like result, we can say result is equal to add and then pass in 2 and 3. So if we print out result now, we should get just 5 outputted to our output here. So run this and we get 5. So this is how this works, okay? So we take in two numbers as arguments and store it into the num1 and num2 parameters, right? And then we use those two parameters to calculate the sum and store it into a variable called sum. And then we just go ahead and call return sum. So return is a built-in keyword in the Python language that allows you to return a value from a function. So return sum. And this will take the value of the sum variable and then give it back as the output to the function, which you can then use, which we are then using to store into this result variable, and then we're using it in a different way, so we're just printing it out at the end. Realistically, again, you're not going to be printing out stuff every time, but it's at such a basic level that we are at right now, that's what we're going to be doing. We're just going to print it out. As you can see, now you know how to return a value from a function so that you can then use the value in some other way, okay? So this is another way that you can make your functions more dynamic because you can then use them in more different ways. So previously we can only print out the value of the sum. Now we can use the value of the sum in many different ways that we're going to see in a second. But before we see more stuff, I want to show you how you can actually improve this. So right here we're storing the sum within a variable called sum and then returning the value the variable of sum. What we can actually do is just take this and just do return directly. So now we're calculating the addition of these two parameters here, and then we're just returning the value that is outputted from that addition, okay, that sum. And that will do the same thing. The same logic will be executed, but it's a more simplified way of writing that code, okay? So let me just give you another example. Let's say we have a multiply function, so we can do define multiply. We can do num1, num2, or we can say something like operand1, operand2, and then now we can do return operand1 times operand2. If we want to, we can have some sort of output just to know that it's working. We can say multiplying operand 1, we'll have a little space, operand 2, and then now whenever we call this multiply function, multiply 1 and 3, we should get 3, and now it's just returning the value instead of printing it out. So what we're going to do is actually store that into a variable called the product. So product is equal to multiply, and then we can go ahead and print that out. Print product, there we go. So if you run this, we should get 3, which we get, as you can see here. Awesome, perfect. So let's just recap this. So we created a multiply function. So define, multiply, these are our 2 parameters that we have. And then we're going to use those parameters to output some, basic logging stuff here. And then we're actually going to do the calculation. So operand 1 times operand 2, and then return the result of that calculation, that arithmetic that we just did. And then now we're going to use the result of that we just returned from this function and store it into a product variable, which we're then printing out. Realistically, you can use that to do something else, like do another calculation like I said before, okay? So as an example, what you can do is something like, let's say you want to do a more complex calculation using the custom functions that you've created. So we can do result is equal to, and we can do something like multiply, and then we can actually do add within that. As the first argument, we can do add, and then we can say something like, what do we want to add? Let's do 2 and 4, so it's going to add 2 and 4. So that's going to be the first argument to the multiply function. And then our second argument, we can do something like 11. So what this will do, if it actually works correctly, it'll add the 2 numbers, 2 and 4, which is actually 6. And then it'll pass in 6 and 11 to the multiply function, which is 66. So if we go ahead and print out result, we should get 66 into the console. And we get none. Interesting. Let me see why that is. Oops, I accidentally got rid of the stuff I had here. So if we do operand 1 times operand 2, now if we rerun this, we should get 66, and we do. Awesome. So as you can see here, we have something a little more complex than we had before. Instead of giving it a number directly, a literal, into the first argument for the multiply function, we're actually calling a function which we know returns a value, and that return value will be used as the first argument to the multiply function. And as you can see here, this is where it gets a little more advanced. This is pretty cool, right? Because now you can use these return values in different cool ways. So wherever a number is required, in this case for the multiply function, you can actually call a function that gives you a number. So since we know the add function returns a number, we can then use that result, that return value, in places where a number is required. So in this case, the arguments for the multiply function. So hopefully that makes sense. Pretty simple concept, but it's just something that we've never really done before. So as another example, we can do that with like an if statement or something like that. So if we do if add, and we can say 5 and 6, if add 5 and 6 is equal to 11, then we can say print, otherwise we can say else, print 5 plus 6 is not equal to 11. There we go. So if we run this, we should get 5 plus 6 is equal to 11. That's obvious. So as you can see here, we are again calling the add function in a different sort of unique place, which in this case is part of this Boolean expression here that is checking for equality of 2 different numbers. So in this case, we're calling add, which we know returns a number, and we're comparing that to the other number, in this case, which is 11. And if they're equal, it'll run this branch of code here. If not, it'll run this branch of code here. Pretty cool, right? Okay, guys, so now let's take a look at a more advanced example of how we can use return statements within our functions. So let's go ahead and see. So let's say that we have a function called define exists in list. So we're going to go ahead and create a function that takes in a list as well as a number, or let's call it a needle. So in this case, this is a function that will check to see if this needle here, the thing that we're looking for, is inside of the list variable, okay? So to do this, we're going to go ahead and loop through each item in the list. So for item in list, and we're going to say if item is equal to the needle, then we can go ahead and return true, because we know that the item that we're looking for, which is the needle, is inside of the list. Okay, so that's pretty simple. Oops. And then otherwise, we're going to go back on the indentation here. We're going to do return false. Okay, so the reason that we're doing this here is because if it gets all the way through the list, if it loops through every single item in the list, if it checks to see if that item exists, at some point, if it does, it'll return true, right? But if it goes through the entire list and it does not find it and it does not return true, this means that the item does not exist in the list. So we're just going to return false at the very end. So let's just test this out real quick. So we're going to do, let's just go ahead and create a list of names. So names is equal to, and then we'll have a needle. So the thing that we're looking for. So name is equal to, we'll say Bob, or we'll say Dan, okay? And then now let's go ahead and call this function. So it's going to return a Boolean of whether or not the item, in this case the needle, is inside the list or not. So we're going to say exists is equal to exists in list. We're going to pass in our list, so names, and then our needle, the thing we're looking for is name. So now this should give us a Boolean true or false if Dan is within the list names. And they're just going to print out whether the value is true or false. So if we run this now, we should get true because Dan is obviously inside of the list. Now if we change to Dan2, we should get false because the name Dan2 is not within this list. If we change it back to something like Jimmy, we should get true again, and we do. Okay, so pretty simple. So as you can see here, the thing that makes this sort of unique from the previous examples is actually because we have multiple return statements within the function definition. So depending on how the logic is executed within this function here, you can return different values. So you can return true if this is true, and you can return false if none of these are the items that you're looking for, okay? So that's just an example of how you can have multiple return statements within a single function definition. So one thing that you want to keep in mind is that if you don't have this ending return statement here, this will never return false. So it can never actually properly do the thing that you want it to do, which is tell you true or false whether the item is in the list or not. So if you don't have it here, and let's say that it goes through this entire list and the item is not there, it'll get to the end of the function definition, right? And since there's no other return statement, it'll actually just return something called none, which is essentially a way of saying nothing. It'll be null if you're familiar with other programming languages, okay? So in this case, we don't want to do that. We don't really want it to return anything other than true or false. So you want to make sure that you have a return statement for the scenario in which there is no item in the list, okay? So have return false, all right? So just make sure that you have all the proper return statements so that your code can execute how you want it to, okay? All right, guys, that's pretty much it for what I want to show you this episode. Hopefully you learned a lot about how to return values from functions, how you can use those values to do different logic other than printing stuff out. And it's pretty powerful, and we're going to see different advanced things you can do with this actually, like returning multiple values and stuff like that. But this is a basic overview of how to return values from functions, and this is all you need to know to pretty much just get started with using functions within Python. Now we're going to move on to different things and more advanced things, so stay tuned and hopefully you learned a lot this episode. Alright, so that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. In the description below, I'll leave a link to the code for this episode so you can check it out. You can bookmark it, come back to it later. If you forget any concepts or you just want to review the concepts I taught in this video, I'll mark everything up with comments so you can come back and read the code without having to rewatch the video, although your reviews are greatly appreciated. So yeah, I'll leave a link for that in the description below, so make sure to check it out. And another thing is I'll leave a link to our Discord server. It's a big community for programmers. You can ask for help on your programming projects if you're stuck on something, or maybe you can get some new friends. If you don't have any friends, there's lots of people here. It's growing really fast. You can find lots of people who are passionate about the same things as you. For example, if you like Minecraft Spigot development, you can find lots of people who like that. If you like C++, if you like Java, if you like web development, it's a really, really big programming community. So feel free to join. There's a link for that in the description below. And the last thing I want to tell you is that if you want to support this channel, you can click the join button below this video, and you can join this channel as a member for as low as 99 cents a month, and you can cancel at any time. You get some cool perks like early access to all of my new videos, a cool rank on my Discord server like you see right here on the side, YouTube members, and also you get to see yourself on the screen like you see right now. So if that sounds cool to you, feel free to join. If you don't want to, that's fine. If you can't, that's okay too. I really just appreciate you watching the video anyway. And thank you. Thanks a lot. And that's it. So if you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more, subscribe. And peace.